Hi, everyone. Welcome. I think we're going to give a few minutes for people to join, and then we'll start. In the meantime, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Great. Welcome, everyone. I think people might join as it goes. I'm very pleased to have you join our meeting today. We are going to talk about reclaiming digital space, feminist tech for safe online spaces for women and girls. It's part of the UN 2.0 week under the theme Culture Change, Delivering for Impact. My name is Caroline Masbunji. I lead UNICEF's global work on technology and gender-based violence in emergency. I am particularly passionate about co-designing ethical, inclusive, and survivor-centered digital tools like LAHA, our virtual safe space platform for women and girls. And today I am excited to explore how we can collectively move from intention to impact. So UN 2.0 is a bold call to modernize the UN system, to make it more agile, data-driven, and inclusive. But the key question remains, inclusive for whom? The humanitarian development ecosystem is currently undergoing a reset, and women and girls, especially in crisis contexts. This year, 90% of over 400 women-led organizations surveyed by UN Women reported direct financial impact from funding cuts across 44 countries. At the same time, coordination mechanisms for GBV are under threat, and safe spaces, both physical and digital, are disappearing. As services, systems, and even solidarity increasingly shift online, technology is no longer a luxury, it is a lifeline. But tech isn't neutral. When it's not grounded in feminist principle, it can harm, exclude, and re-traumatize the very communities it is meant to serve. The digital revolution must not reproduce the same power dynamics that we're trying to dismantle offline. Instead, it must be reclaimed by and for women and girls and marginalized communities. Today, you will hear from humanitarians, policymakers, funders, feminist activists, and tech actors working at the front line of this digital transformation. Together, we will explore how to build safe, inclusive, and ethical online spaces, starting with what it means truly to design feminist technology. So before I turn to my esteemed panelists, let's start by hearing from you. So we'll head over to menti.com, and I think Virginia is going to paste in the chat how to connect to Menti. Okay, I'm sharing the screen. Okay, perfect. So if you can go to menti.com or click on the link on your browser and type the code that is on the screen, 19290729. And we'll be asking you a couple of questions. So maybe, Virginia, if you can tell me when we have a critical mass. And if you face any issue, you can also type your answer in the chat if you feel comfortable.
Let's give it a couple more minutes. A couple of people right now connected to the Menti.
Okay. All right, should we go ahead and start? Maybe people can join in the meantime. Can we go to the first slide, Virginia?
Yeah, 1 second. Do you see it? The first slide is up.
No, we're still on the first slide. So if you move to the first question.
On my screen, I see the first question and some answers are starting to come in.
Okay, we can only see the initial slide here, or at least from my side. Okay, here it is. All right, so the first question is, what first word comes to your mind when you hear feminist tech? So I see inclusion, inclusive, ethical, consent, empathy, positive, participation, effective, safe. Ethical, empowerment in the chat. Women in tech. Protection, empathy, safe, empower, access. Activists, not for men. That's interesting. Okay, I feel we can probably make a pretty good definition with all of those words. I don't know what my fellow panelists think. Safeguard, pushback, against sexual violence. Great. Cutting edge. Oh, I like that. Embedded bias. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, we'll move to the second question. I also can't see it yet. Maybe there's a bit of a delay.
I'm so sorry. I don't know why there's a delay. It is up on my screen and some answers are starting to come in. So hopefully it'll show up in a minute.
Yes, we'll share the code again. So probably for those of you who are populating it, it's a multiple choice question. Who do you think leads most conversation on online safety in humanitarian settings? I'll copy it in the chat if people want to start answering it. But yeah, from my side, I can't see it on the screen yet. Okay, now it is.
Sorry, let me try and reshare since you still couldn't see it.
No problem. All right. So it's a
Do you see it now?
Yes, we can see it now. Thanks. So most people are saying humanitarian actors and feminist movements, but also survivor and community-led groups are mentioned, tech companies are mentioned, and governments to a lesser extent. Great. And the last question is a statement rating. So we have 3 statements for you. And I'll also put it in the chat. Oh, no, sorry. It's not I skipped one question. So it's an open-ended question. What are the biggest risks when tech solutions aren't grounded in feminist principles? What are the biggest risks? So it's open-ended, so you can just type. Go ahead and type. Bias is coming up quite a bit. Exclusion. Incomplete risk assessment, system weights. Lack of representation, harmful content. Great. I think we'll talk quite a bit about that during the panel. So I suggest we move on as people think as well of their answers. So this is like a rating question statement to finish off. So we have 3 statements. Digital solutions used in your work meaningfully include the voices of women and girls affected by crisis. So this is whether like not at all is 1 and fully is 5. So you can move your cursor on the line. The second is the UN is fit for purpose to develop safe technology for women and girls. And the third is if technology is not feminist, it doesn't mean it's unsafe for women and girls. So those are statements, and you need to say whether you agree or not. And yeah, Virginia, I still can't see that other slide. So maybe if you reshare.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Answers are coming in. Let me reshare. I don't know what is happening.
Always happens.
I can see it. Can you see it now?
Not yet. Well, okay. Yeah. So we can't see answers yet. Maybe you can
try to reload.
All right, now we can see it. Okay, so most people, oh, well, no, it's changing quite a bit. People are divided whether digital solutions used in their work meaningfully include the voices of women and girls. And people mostly agree that the UN is fit for purpose to develop safe technology. People mostly disagree with the statement that if technology is not feminist, it does not mean that it's safe for women and girls. Okay. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us. Thanks, Virginia. I think we can go ahead and stop sharing the screen. Great. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with everyone. We'll have the opportunity at the end of the session to go over your answers again. Now I want to turn to my fellow panelists. So we will be discussing what it means to design and defend safe spaces for women and girls online. So on the panel today, we have Jen Moolman, who's the co-executive director at the Newman Fund, the first fund dedicated to resourcing feminist tech in the Global South. With over 25 years in gender justice and digital rights, Jen has been at the forefront of shaping feminist internet governance and tackling online online gender-based violence. She brings a movement builder's lens to the conversation and will help us imagine how feminist tech can and should look like. Welcome, Jen. Next, we have Ranway Scotland. She's the senior advisor at the Norway Ministry of Foreign Affairs with over 2 decades of diplomatic and humanitarian policy experience. Norway has long championed the rights of women and girls in conflict, and Runway is here to reflect on how governments can sustain that leadership in today's shifting humanitarian landscape, including in the digital realm. Sylvia Musalagani leads safety policy at Meta across Africa, Middle East, and Turkey. She has shaped policy initiatives and digital safety tools that impact millions, and she brings deep knowledge on how platforms can be made safer, especially for women and girls in fragile settings. Sylvia is also a longtime advocate for internet freedom and gender equality in digital governance. And I'll be moderating today's discussion. So let's start with the basics. Feminist tech is gaining traction, but it also risks becoming another buzzword or tick box. So Jen, you've spent years defining and defending feminist technology from a movement perspective. In your opinion, what does feminist tech actually mean in practice? And why does that definition matter now more than ever?
Everyone, first just to say, hey, Sylvia. Sylvia and I met, and I think the meeting of Sylvia and I is part of responding to this question about what feminist tech is. We met, I think, almost a decade ago in Addis at the Africa Internet Governance Forum. And it was one of the very early moments when it began to be a lot of visibility about linking feminism and power and a very strong critique of power and this kind of analysis to conversations about digital technologies. And Sylvia was, and that's where we met, and it was really great. And half the time we were like, oh my God, what does this mean? Not a lot of language, but I think that's the first piece about what feminist tech is, right? It's about analysis. It really is about understanding that we are talking about power and how different systems of power and oppression relate in the context of digital technologies and the internet. The second thing for us is that it's about community. Feminist tech centers historically excluded and oppressed communities, and also those who are most impacted by developments in technology. It's also about issues, and it forefronts the priorities of people who are most at risk of injustice, and be that LGBTQI communities, migrant communities, young people, indigenous people, Black people, Afro-descendant people. So definitely surfacing what is often not seen in conversations about technology, which, as Caroline said, are often very gender neutral. And the last thing that, and this is just a Newman definition, right? Every concept, every movement, every moment will have a different way of talking about what it is. But this last piece really is about the activism and the kinds of different interventions and things that people who are interested in power and technology do. Yeah, you build campaigns, you have artistic practices, you think about policy, you convene, and very importantly, you experiment. And this is a big part of what we think feminist technology is. It really is about having the imagination to think about technology and social justice outside of what has become a very overpowering lens, that this is the way the tech is, this is the way the tech will be, and this is how we will be inside the tech. So it is very like kind of liberating, yeah, opening up the kind of imagination. But as I said, it's very different in different contexts, but these are some of the things that the Newman Fund uses to talk about what feminist tech is.
Thanks so much, Jen. And I want to stay with that for a second, and maybe offer some thoughts as well, linked to my experience. When we talk about feminist tech in humanitarian settings, particularly, as you said, it's very also context specific. Maybe what does it look like when it's done right, if we may say it like this, or when it's done wrong? And maybe like to share that in my role at UNICEF, I see a lot of technology within outside UNICEF in humanitarian context, government-led, non-government-led, and so on, that are developed in humanitarian context every day, and oftentimes not necessarily with a feminist lens. And as you rightly said, Jen, tech is not neutral. So it really reflects the assumption and the values of the people that build it. And oftentimes it is not grounded in the lived realities of women and girls. So some of the things I'm seeing, for example, is a chatbot for aid distribution that doesn't anticipate that it might be used by survivors of violence, and that being problematic in itself because it's going to create some safety and ethical concern. Or an app that is meant to support survivors but is installed on a phone that is shared by a controlling husband or father. And again, that's a very common scenario in the context where we work, and that compromises their safety and their confidentiality. So those risks are very real, and they arise from the fact that there isn't a design that is feminist or survivor centered in its approach. At UNICEF, we have developed a feminist research process guide that we use in how we inform the research, including the user research around the way we develop technology. And those are some of the principles we grounded in our design, including of products like LAHA, our virtual safe space platform. And it offers, LAHA offers information on sexual and reproductive health, including technology-facilitated violence, a moderated forum, and links to services. We co-designed LAHA with women and girls. So we really centered women and girls in the overall process. We're now establishing a girls' council that is at the center of our governance structure, and they're going to lead the decisions on LAHA. So those are important because I really believe that the feedback that we received around the fact that LAHA make women and girls feel heard, valued, seen, is because we took that feminist approach. I think maybe I wanted to just offer that example to illustrate some of the things you were talking about, Jan. I now want to turn to you, Sylvia. We know that tech has power, but with power comes responsibilities, and sometimes power can harm as much as it can help. Can you share a moment when tech solutions failed the very communities it was supposed to support? What went wrong and what did you learn?
Yeah, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this conversation, Jan. As usual, it's great to see you. She's one of the women who contributed in me joining tech. So always glad to see you on such engagements. And with regards to your question, when has tech failed us women? There's so many countless times that this has happened. And I feel from where I sit, it's always a battle of countering the failures that tech has enabled. It's an everyday fight for us. So just yesterday at Meta, we announced that we have taken down or are currently suing the Crash AI, which is a Nudify app. And for those who don't know what Nudify apps, they are AI apps that have been built for the purpose of creating non-consensual intimate images. And so we know AI is powerful. We know it has its good side, but now we are also seeing the side of it that is being used now specifically to enhance the abuses that women have been facing. So previously we were dealing with offline abuses, then tech came and the offline abuses moved online. And now with AI, it's like now being magnified, and we're seeing it being used for the creation. And so for me, that's a case in point where I'm seeing tech being misused. And a lot of the times, the problem is from a tech perspective, we're not being proactive enough in addressing this. A lot of the times, the challenge is being addressed after the fact. Not because this is something that we don't want to do, but then it's in the makeup of a lot of the tech companies, and I know we'll have conversations on women in tech, but when you have very few women building out this technology in the technology companies, then you cannot anticipate these kind of challenges. And for me, that's the biggest place where tech has failed us, is in not having enough of us in there, ensuring that we are thinking ahead of these problems. At Meta, like in my team specifically, I would say we're 90% women, which is something I really appreciate. And I see how it works firsthand, because when we're building out the different tools, we work very closely with the product teams. And so whenever they're coming and they're proposing different products, then we're able to say, okay, that's a very good idea, but have you thought of the impact? We're designing AI glasses. Have you thought of the privacy impact when it comes to women and the kind of abuses that they will be faced with just because of this new technology? Then we start now ensuring that from the product design phase, this is something that is already taken into account. So I would say not including women is the biggest problem in tech.
A great answer, and it's really powerful to hear from your own experience as well, Sylvia. Thank you for that. I want to turn to you, Ranway, and to the role of governments in building safe digital futures. Norway, as I mentioned earlier, has championed the protection of women and girls in crisis and is continuing to show its commitment now in this very challenging time. How are you translating this commitment into action, especially when it comes to safe and inclusive technology in this current climate?
Thank you very much, Caroline, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for the question. Yes, as you say, Norway, we have prioritized mitigating gender-based violence in emergencies and crises for a long time. We know that women and girls are disproportionately affected in crisis, although we have to remember that also men, boys, and LGBTI persons are at risk. But because of this, we want to continue, especially now with the strong anti-rights agenda we see today, and also the recent huge cuts in humanitarian funding and the humanitarian reset, as you say. We want to prioritize this work even more. Due to this, we have decided to become the leader of the call to action on protection for gender-based violence in emergencies. And we would like to not look back but try to be constructive, realistic, and forward-looking in this climate, and do the best we can to safeguard the values and the important work that has been done so far in our leadership of the call to action. So next week there will be a meeting in the call to action, and the priorities for the time ahead will be thoroughly discussed. But moving on, tech and women and girls. As you have all pinpointed, if developed in the right way, new technologies have a great potential in help keeping women and girls in conflict and crisis safer. And that's why Norway for several years have made a conscious choice to support this development. So protection is an important focus area in our innovation Norway-led humanitarian innovation program, where we support several projects. And also we support GBV tech through ELRA. I'm sure many of you know about ELRA. And as all of you have also alluded to, there are quite a lot of risks in this work, in the GBV programming work. And there are developed minimum standards for this to mitigate these risks, even though you have also worked on that in the tech sphere, Caroline. But these minimum standards, they have relevance also when we develop tech, and it's important to remember and look and thoroughly look at when developing in the development process. So the clue is the development process. If we build safe tech for women and girls, the women and girls, they need to be part of the development process themselves. It should be shaped around their needs and their contexts, and it should not be that we find some need that tech can meet, we have to ask the people themselves what they need. And this is exactly the strength of the LAHA platform that you told us about, that you had developed in UNICEF, Caroline. You explained this very well, how this participatory approach is so important. And we are very happy to be able to support the LAHA project. Another project we have supported is looking at how we can use virtual reality technology to provide a stable and high quality therapy program for survivors of gender-based violence. This project was developed by the Norwegian Church Aid, and again, women and girls were an integral part of developing the project from the start. The participatory approach we have also used in several other projects. Save the Children, they are providing internet and business opportunities for women in a refugee camp in Rwanda. Through ELRA, we have supported a partnership between Oxfam and NAVAT. And here we also see, and they have developed an online platform for women who needs remote service provision. And they have focused a lot on sustainability. And this is also important in the times we are facing now, where there is low funding for GBV services as well. So the social enterprise model they have developed, they sell services in markets where there are purchasing power, but free provision of services in humanitarian settings, so that the project can, this kind of innovative finance models is also important to integrate in the projects for the sustainability purposes. So we hope that by supporting many of these tech projects, and we hope that they can be adopted to other settings, and that we also contribute to establishing a culture for innovation in organizations, a culture for cooperation with private partners, for example. That's not always easy, so that the innovations can help us both in this situation to be more efficient in this situation with lower degrees of funding, but also, of course, to help the women and girls and other vulnerable groups to be safer. Thank you.
Much. Thank you, Ranway, and thanks for articulating so clearly how practically you're translating those commitments as well. I put in the chat as well a link to the call to action to end gender-based violence, that I think is a really important momentum right now that, as you mentioned, Norway is leading. So I wanted to maybe turn to you, Sylvia, with pretty much the same question, but from the tech company angle. What is the role that tech companies can play in shifting the needle for women and girls? Where do you see potential? So you talked quite a bit about women in STEM. Is there anything else that you could talk about in terms of how they can make a difference?
Yes, I think one of the areas that tech can really make a difference is by engaging more with, women organizations. So this can be the CSOs, the gender-based violence survivors, to really understand the experiences of women. As I mentioned before, not just when it comes to responding to harm, but when it comes to really building out the technology, because this technology impacts, it impacts women. And so we have to ensure that there's a deliberate inclusion of women in these conversations from the point of building out this technology. The other thing is also being very inclusive in hiring, ensuring that you have more women in these companies. And on the hiring side of things, I think a lot of people think when it comes to tech, the only thing that you can be is an engineer or a coder or anything like that. I can do none of that, but you still have an impact, within the company. So I'm a policy expert, and that's the sort of expertise I can bring even into those product cycles. So I think also creating awareness on the kind of careers that exist within tech that can enable more of us to actually come and participate. So yes, we have those who are directly influencing or building the product, but we also have those of us who are directly influencing those products. So how do we ensure that we have more of us within the companies, bring more awareness on what exactly is it to be a woman in tech? What exactly is it to be working in a tech company, and how can we build on that? Another place is ensuring that when it comes to the solutions to a lot of the issues that women are facing online, also providing that platform where those solutions can be shared. So for instance, within Meta, we have like a Meta Safety Center where we have a dedicated hub for women and other underrepresented groups like LGBTIQ, where we've worked with experts to create safety resources. So if for common harm types that we see on our platform. So first of all is looking at the policies that we have and ensuring that if you're using our platforms, you actually understand these policies and you know what policy can be used to remediate a certain harm type that you're facing. And when the policies fail, what kind of tools are available at your disposal to also ensure that you're responding to this to these abuses that are faced on online platforms. So I think, and this is a place where we also can't work in silos as tech because we're not the experts in everything. We need the experts on the ground who are constantly engaging with women, with survivors of domestic violence, with girls, to ensure that we get that expert-driven advice also onto those platforms so we can really distribute this. The other area that and I think especially in this environment where there's a lot of funding cuts, when it comes to the support for also other women who are developing technology that would be supportive of of more women also being part in tech or addressing some of the solutions that we are looking to address. How can tech companies also be part of the funding solution? It's something that we also need to deliberately think about, how we really supporting that ecosystem by also putting funding. And funding might not just be the financial resources, it can also be the expertise, how we sharing the expertise from inside the companies to organizations who actually need this sort of expertise. So where is that exchange happening? Yeah, leave it at that now.
Thank you so much. Those are really critical points that you raised, and it's incredible how all of our intervention pinned down to participation of women and girls, and really centering and other groups, obviously vulnerable groups like LGBTIQs and so on, and making sure that they are at the center of what we do. We talked quite a bit about how power in tech mirrors existing inequalities, privilege, patriarchy, exclusion. And unless we intentionally disrupt these dynamics, they will persist in the offline world, in the online world. A lot of the gains that we've seen over the years in terms of women's rights have been done thanks to feminist movements. But despite the growing role of technology in humanitarian context, decision-making still rests with with a few powerful actors. So I wanted to turn to you, Jen, on how can feminist movements, especially in the global South, reclaim the space and shift power dynamics in the digital governance as well. What would it require from different actors, from donors, from governments, from platforms, to enable those feminist movements to do that? Over to you.
Thank you. I think I just wanted to comment a little bit about what Ranvig and Sylvia was saying. I think a lot of what we see in conversations around digital technology in crisis context and humanitarian context start from the assumption that there actually is connectivity, that the communications infrastructure actually is intact. And in most situations, A, it's often deliberately targeted, and B, because in protracted crises, the maintenance isn't happening. So often the infrastructure doesn't exist at all. And one of the things that the Newman Fund is exploring right now is what does it mean to be in this particular context when connectivity and access in and of itself is such a big issue. And one of the things that we really have begun to explore and are really trying to think through, it isn't only about new technology, but it's also about old technology and lost technology. And I think it'll be useful if I can just share a few examples of what we are aware is happening. And this is particularly in the context of protracted crisis, where it is impossible to rebuild infrastructure, which has begun to be the norm in many spaces. Not only, critically targeting infrastructure, but also internet blackouts, yeah, the deliberate interruption of communication channels as a foundation for being able to respond in particular ways. So we have one group who we are working with or was part of our community who is experimenting again with high frequency radio. Yeah, like if you have nothing to work with, you go back to what it is that you know. And this is a system that is open source, it's free, it can be adaptable. And this is in Brazil, right? So really examples of what it means to listen locally and respond to what is happening in context. Another example, and I just need to find this here because I'm so impressed with it, is a group who are creating zines, yeah, kind of zine like hard copy, analog things, to share about how to use waste materials to maintain and revive amplifiers, radio, speakers, because in crisis, yeah, there's people making music, people understanding radio. Because when you have nothing, you have to use what is there. And I think this is one of the values of feminist tech of saying that when we're talking about solutions and we're understanding scale, scale is not only about the multiplication of users or reach. Scale often is about a deep scale, a scale that is having a very particular kind of impact and is having meaningful change for the people who we are concerned with, who are the people who are most at risk of injustice, and especially in humanitarian crisis situations. Now I'll come to your question, Caroline, and I'll be very brief in this. I think reclaiming the space means a lot of different things. As Sylvia is saying, one of the first things it means to be there. And I think for many women's rights organizations, this has historically not always been the space in relation to the digital, where we have occupied. And often that's because, like, what is the technical expertise do you need? Do I know about internet governance? Do I know about regulation? This is kind of the policy framework. But actually, what we know is we know our experiences, and we know that unless we are designing for the most at risk, nothing is going to change because we continue to design and have the lens that is not about social justice, that is not about change, and that is not about kind of difference that we need to make. I think that women's movements have done a lot of work with the private sector and big tech in really trying to think how can we make this work together, which is why there was Trust and Safety Council, which is why there are many allies within different kind of platforms. But what really is important is that we also invest in alternatives. We have to invest in developing alternative infrastructure where the aim is not profit and accumulation, but the aim is to be developing for context specific responses to make a difference in what it is that we're trying to do. And I think lastly, what is necessary is for us to remember that the technology isn't going to go away, yeah, at all. But we need more options, not less. We need more tech, not less. We need tech that is infused with a different set of values that does not make us feel so overwhelmed, that allows you to say, what do I have around me? Who is my community? And I think very importantly, we also need a bigger community of feminist tech actors who are occupying these different spaces. And just to say, it's been building over the last 15 years. When I started doing this work, we often would say it's two women and a laptop. And now there's more of us, and there's more of us in many different spaces. And we are connected also to each other. And this idea of allyship is not only within kind of civil society, but it is also within, like, which is why I know Sylvia, right? We have to be everywhere, and we have to be everywhere with the kind of common goal that we share no matter where we are located. And I think that makes a big difference. And the last thing is definitely in the context of extreme funding cuts and what this means from bilateral donors to philanthropy and just the world that we live in now. I think we have to really double down on investing in feminist tech as a space that actually has opportunities because the field is maturing, there's more people, and people are connected to each other. And I think that as a foundational way of thinking about what can happen to make some of these shifts is really important to start from.
Thank you so much, Jen. So much of what you say is really much resonates and is so powerful. We are going to move to Q&A. We run a bit over. I know there was a question in the chat that I'm happy to ask to our panelists and see who wants to come in, or if several of you want to come in, while others feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask a question or to put it in the chat. So our question is, it might be a straightforward question, but what is the specific role and responsibility of men when designing for inclusive tech, especially around sensitive topics such as sexual violence against women? Does that speak to anyone?
I'm happy to give it a go based on my experience working at Meta, where what I've seen working is when the men actually real allies and really make that effort to understand the situation. They may not experience it, but understand the situation and provide solutions. And that only happens when they actually listen, And I'm proud to say I've worked with men who are genuinely allies and are genuinely there to fix things and are doing it even outside their roles, And so it's important for them to come with that listening ear, to come with that allyship spirit, because if you do not have that, then it will be moments where you're pretty much just fighting with the people who are trying to bring this change, and also them understanding that once we take into account or we design for women, you've also designed for men, because the issues that we are facing, yes, you will also face. And it's something that will just deal with the problem at a large scale. So you're not just doing it for the sake of women being safe from where I come from, but you're doing it for the sake of all of us being safe. So having that understanding that we're not just doing this to make women feel good, but we are doing it so that we can all benefit from it. So I've seen that work at Meta with men who are actually true allies, and they support their cause, they listen, and they actually do what they're meant to do.
Thanks so much, Sylvia. I noted down your quote, when you design for women, you design for men. I think that's so true. And it's also a question of positionality, right? Like if true men allyship and champions are also around those that reflect on their privileges, their roles, and that shared vision with feminism. So it's so instrumental. I don't see other questions, and I know we're reaching time. So I do want to maybe pose a question to everyone here. So those on the chat and here I see a question. Okay, so would you mind to place it in the chat as well? I think we're over time already, so apologies for that. But yeah, maybe just one quick question to everyone that I'll put in the chat. If women and girls could redesign the internet from scratch, what would be one feature, value, or principle that they would prioritize that the rest of us have overlooked? So I'll open that question to our dear panelists. Ranway?
Yes, thank you. It's a very, very interesting question. And I think that if women and girls were able to come in more from the start and redesign the internet, we would have better systems for accountability and protection from abuse. We see a lot of abuse on the internet, but not a lot of justice. So yeah, this is what I really think would be different. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Ranway. Sylvia, Jen?
I think safety and privacy by design won't just be an idea, but it will be something that is more of a reality if women actually at the forefront, because our experiences online are hampered by abuses on the safety and privacy side. So it's something that we already think of. So safety and privacy by design won't just be ideas.
Absolutely. Jan?
In addition to what you have both said, I think there's also something about creativity and expression and fun and leisure and bringing our whole selves into all of the spaces that we are in, and not the kind of primary focus on technology as very utilitarian. Because if it's part of our lives, it's part of who we are. So how do you bring that humanness, that kind of humanity, and solidarity in real ways into something that has become that shaping who we are? So yeah, and they'll be funner.
That's beautiful. And what I wrote as an answer to that question is quite close to that. I said they would design an internet where care is a core principle, not control. So you said it in a funnier and more eloquent way. So we're at time, and I'll invite people that have to jump off to do that. But if I may ask, we have a couple of really interesting questions in the chat. So for those who want to stay behind, and if our dear panelists are willing to stay for another few minutes to answer those two questions, I'll go ahead and ask them. So the first one is how to make sure women not only benefit for technology made by the majority by men, but can be in the heart of the process, especially in the Grand South. And maybe I'll ask the second question as well. Given the persistent gaps in representation and digital safety for Black women and women from the global South, especially those living in the westernized nation, how can we ensure that these voices are not only included but centered in the design, governance, and evaluation of the digital safety initiatives, so that solutions address the most acute and intersectional risks faced by those most often left out of the global feminist tech policy? Two really important questions. I don't know, and they're very related as well. Anyone wants to come in?
I can offer some thoughts. I think while the field has changed over the years and there are many more different kinds of people, there are different kinds of bodies who are participating in global governance and regulatory spaces, I don't think that we have continued to put the amount of effort that is needed for participation to be meaningful. Yes, you can have more people who are there, but at what are the different kinds of spaces that you are in? And often I think when I used to work at an organization called the Association for Progressive Communications, and one of a very important strategy was how do we build our strength and allyship and solidarity while we are in spaces that are kind of hostile, and they're hostile because they can't hear us. They're hostile because they're very technically kind of obscure. So on the one hand, I think we definitely need to be putting more effort into creating those spaces and opportunities for us to think together, work together, and influence together. And to do this in a very strategic kind of way and to open the spaces. Yeah, I mean, Sylvia being at Meta is a very significant thing. A Black woman in that position is not something to be frowned at. And that happens because of different kinds of solidarities and movements and spaces that Cynthia is part of. So how do we do this with more intentionality in government and private sector spaces? What kind of building and support? And it's not about capacity building. Sometimes it really is, who else do I know who is going there? Can you help me figure out the space? This is how you open. This is how you change. And I think women's movements and women's rights organizations actually do this really well. Marginalized people, vulnerable communities, we know how to organize. And we just need to take our organizing power into these different spaces and have other kinds of allies, yeah, with different kinds of bodies who do have more power and use that power in this way, not to gatekeep.
Thanks so much, Jen. That's so powerful. And Ranway, I will invite you to come in as well. And I just wanted to just observe that you all mentioned so many times allyship and sisterhood, and how that can shift the power balance, which we know in feminist movement has been so critical. And it's been quite incredible listening to you all, but also because we're having this event in the context of UN 2.0, I also question like what the UN can do to amplify those networks and sisterhood processes that feminist movements have and hold, whether they sit in tech, in governments, in CSOs, what role can we play in this? I think that's really important to reflect on in terms of positionality. Over to you, Ranway.
No, I agree so very much, and we also know with the humanitarian reset that there will be a much stronger emphasis, hopefully, as a result of this, on local leadership and also on leveraging, I mean, the experiences of civil society and feminist movements, and this is something we are very conscious about in our call to action time in front of us as well, that we really have to do, and also as a donor we need to be better at requesting and demanding that there should be local leadership, and there should be developed indicators and all these systems you all know about that, so that we see that this is happening, because it's crucial. Thank you.
Thank you so much for adding that. I think we're coming to time. We're a little bit over time. Apologies for that. I want to thank you, Jan, Ranway, and Sylvia, for joining this panel. It was very enriching for me to listen to your perspective and your expertise. And thank you all for joining online, for the questions, for the engagement. We really appreciate those spaces where we can have those frank and honest and necessary conversations. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.